In order to work with system configuration or maintenance, you have to have administrator privileges. So I'm going to ensure that I am logged on using my administrator account. Malicious software that can accidentally load onto your computer through network or internet use is really an ongoing problem. You should have an antivirus program installed on your computer. Now you can do that if you're using a home computer, or your IT people will probably have already managed it if you're on a business network. Two of the leading vendors of antivirus programs are McAfee and Norton, but there really are many other good programs available as well. So do a little research, and really I would say the most important thing for a home computer is have an antivirus program. It really doesn't matter which one it is, anything is going to be better than nothing. Windows, however, does provide a free program that is known as anti-spyware. Now that's not the same as antivirus, it's anti-spyware, which is a little bit different. It watches for software that may get loaded onto your computer that would track and watch what you do and use that information about what you do with your computer to send to other third parties, for example, advertisers. And it does this without your permission or without your knowledge. This particular program with Windows is called Windows Defender, and I simply want to show you how to find it and how to run a scan. To do so, I'm going to move down to my Start button, and I'm going to type Defender. And then I'll select Windows Defender that comes up after the search. There really isn't a lot of configuring that you need to do with Windows Defender. First of all, when it opens, it currently tells me I have no unwanted or harmful software that's been detected. My computer is running normally. This is good. But if I didn't trust it, I could go up to the Scan menu and I could click on the drop-down. You can do a quick scan, you can do a full scan, or you can do a custom scan. Obviously, a full scan would be useful, and you might want to do those on a periodic basis. If something starts to happen a little strangely, then maybe do a quick scan and say, you know what, something's kind of weird, let me just have you check. You also can do a custom scan, and I'm just going to click on that option to show you what it is. This allows you to actually do either a quick or a full scan, but by default, it wants to scan only selected drives or folders. So let's say that you're working and your computer is just fine. But all of a sudden somebody gives you a USB thumb drive and you're working off of that and the computer starts to act a little funny, a little slow, or you notice little things happening. You might choose to only scan that drive and say, well, did they give me an infected drive? That would be something that would be possible. Now, I honestly don't really recommend that because often what happens is if the software is present on a removable drive, it may actually duplicate itself over to your main hard drive. So a quick scan or a full scan is probably going to be your best option. Regardless of what you do, you'll make the choice and then you would simply click Scan Now. After you've run one or more scans, you can go back and look at your history, and you also can look at certain tools and settings. Let's go ahead and give that a click just to show you what it's actually doing. You can work with options on how the program runs, and you can also do something called SpyNet, which is an online community that you can belong to kind of read up and keep abreast of what's going on with things. This is also where you can find any quarantined items. So if Defender actually finds something that it thinks is spyware, it's going to quarantine it or set it aside, and then you can either remove or restore that software. If it's something that should be there, great, you put it back where it was. But if not, you can say, thank you for finding it, now get rid of it off of my system. You also can view software that you're saying is allowed, because some software programs may act like spyware. But if it's a program that your business uses, then instead of having it quarantined all the time, you can simply say, please disregard that. I know what that program is doing and I want to allow it. This really is a great program and it's very easy to use. Simply find it and run it on occasion, as well as setting up your options to make sure that it's working the way that you want it to. For now, I'll go ahead and just close out of this window. And we'll move on to some other maintenance type tasks. The next thing I want to do is actually open up the control panel, because the control panel is, well, just like it sounds, it's kind of the panel that controls everything that you can do with your computer. And if you're ever looking for things that you can use to optimize your hardware, your software, or your operating system, the chances are you'll probably find it somewhere on the control panel. So let's move back down to our Start button. And let's move over and choose Control Panel. That will work in any version of Windows that you have, XP, Vista, or 7. And again, we can see some of the categories that we saw when we were working with user accounts as well. We're going to focus on just a few of these categories. The first one that I want to take a look at is known as System and Security. It's on the top of the left-hand column. We can click on System and Security or any one of these titles to actually go into kind of the overview. Or it shows us the most commonly used features within that category. For example, review your computer status, back up your computer, and so forth. I'm going to go ahead and just click on the System and Security heading. That brings us into this window, which brings System and Security down into some further categories. For Windows 7, you see something called the Action Center. That's something that you won't see in XP or Vista. But there are similar options. They're just going to be under different categories. We're going to skip over that, and we're also not going to talk about firewall security. We're going to come down and start with the system itself. Now, we've talked an awful lot in this course about hardware and software and processors and motherboards and RAM memory, but we haven't actually shown you where you can see what your computer has. This is it. There's actually a link that says View the amount of RAM and processor speed. So we'll go ahead and give that a click. And that brings up basic information about my computer. It actually gives me a lot of good information. It tells me that I'm currently running Windows 7 Ultimate. If I look down near the bottom of the screen, it has something called a Windows Experience Index. Now, this is going to be some kind of a number, and this number is achieved by looking at all kinds of things. Your processor, how much memory you have, if you have video cards, and those types of things. The higher the number, kind of the more powerful your computer is. The reason this is important is when you go to purchase software vendors, instead of listing all of the different requirements for different pieces of hardware, instead it gives you a Windows Experience Index. So if you're buying a game and it says your Experience Index number has to be 4, then this computer is probably not going to behave optimally for that particular game. My guess at this point is that this particular operating system and computer doesn't have enough video power because that kind of a game requires video. So it simplifies it by giving you a number, and that's what the rating is. What's more interesting to us right now is that we can now see that we have an Intel Core 2 CPU, technically a T7400, running at 2.16 gigahertz. Beautiful. We also see that we have 512 megs of RAM and that all of it is being usable. It's a 64-bit operating system instead of 32, and that it currently does not have any pen or touch input available. It also gives me some network information like my computer name, the full computer name, if there was a description, and what network work group I belong to. So as you can see, this gives me a lot of very quick and concise information that I might need either to troubleshoot, to provide to somebody who wants to know about my computer, or if I'm trying to figure out what the actual specifications of my system is. From here, on the left-hand side, we can further go to the Device Manager, where we can see things like what kind of network interface card we have. We can set up remote settings and a lot of other things. For now, I'm simply going to use the back button to get back to my Control Panel, System and Security Settings. As I said, there's a lot of things that are available from the Control Panel, and we don't have time to go through all of them. I do want to go through a couple of other important pieces though, and one of them is known as Windows Update. Windows Update is a service from Microsoft that will allow your computer to take little bits of information, nothing personal, send it to Microsoft, and Microsoft will say whether there are any updates that need to be downloaded to keep your system at its latest, greatest state. Usually I recommend that people turn this on. So I'm going to go ahead and click the link that says Turn Automatic Updating On or Off. You can see that the default setting is to install the updates automatically. You can change this. You can say download them, but let me choose whether to install them. Or don't even download them, but just check for updates, but let me choose which ones to download. Or never do it. Now, we really don't recommend the never check. I like the fully automated one, because if Microsoft thinks I need to update the system, I probably should just let them do it, and it's one less thing I have to worry about. But some people do choose one of these other kind of middle options, so they have a little bit of control. I'm going to leave mine at install them automatically. The next part is, when do I want it to do that? It can be really annoying if in the middle of my workday the computer says, I need to shut off because I want to install updates. So I can choose when to do it and how often. I'm going to say that every day is probably not necessary, but I might have it do it every Sunday at 3 in the morning. That's usually a time I'm not working on the computer. You also can have an option to give you recommended updates, the same way you receive important updates. Now, important updates are things like security patches and breaches or errors that they know of. Recommended things are things that you don't have to have, but as it says, they are recommended. You can also say who's allowed to install these updates on the computer, which would mean either an administrator or whoever's logged on. I'll go ahead and leave these the way that they are, and I'm going to say OK to save those settings. That brings me back to my control panel. Windows Updates is something that I think everybody should take a look at, and by automating it, it's one less thing you have to do. Backup and restore is an absolutely imperative thing to know how to do, but we're going to do that in the next lesson, so I'm going to skip over that for now and come down to administrative tools at the very bottom. Believe it or not, your computer can get kind of congested, if you will, and there are a couple of things that you can do in order to help it run better. One of them is known as freeing up disk space. I'm going to go ahead and click on that option and show you what it does. Now, when I clicked it, the window actually came up behind the control panel. So I'm just going to move up here and click on this to bring it forward. And I'll move it kind of over to the center so we can see it. Disk cleanup allows us to kind of clean out stuff that we don't normally think about. We can be really good at recognizing when we need to delete a WordPad file or an Excel spreadsheet. But it's the other stuff that kind of happens behind the scenes that can get built up in our system and we just don't know it, but it causes it to slow down. Some of those things are listed here. If you've downloaded program files that you don't need, or if you use the internet and you have a bunch of temporary internet files, offline web pages, things sitting in the recycle bin. Remember, there's only supposed to be trash in the recycle bin, so maybe you need to empty that out. And then some more technical things like setup log files, temporary files, thumbnails for pictures. There actually are a lot of things here. You'll see that only the most common things are selected, like thumbnails for pictures, downloaded programs, and temporary internet files. On the right side, it actually shows you how much space those things are taking up. So I currently have almost 10 megabytes of space being used by temporary files. I don't need those because if I go to the website again, it will download it. So these are some things that I can do to speed up my system. After you make the choices that you want, it tells you at the bottom how much disk space you're actually going to gain. Now 14.8 megabytes is not that big of a deal when I have almost 32 gigabytes on my hard drive, but it could make a significant difference depending on what you've been doing with your computer. Furthermore though, if you're not quite sure what it is, you can read a description and you can even click a button that lets you view exactly what files are going to be deleted. When all of that is set, you can simply click OK and it will delete the files. I'll go ahead and do that now. Because it's going to permanently delete these files, not just move them to the recycle bin, it says, are you sure you want to permanently delete? And I'll say yes, go ahead and delete the files. When it's finished, the window simply closes and takes you back to whatever you had. So that's easy. You should do that on a fairly regular basis because trust me, a lot of stuff can get collected that you're not even sure is there. The second thing that you can do is called defragmenting your hard drive, or a defrag. Again, I'll go ahead and give that link a click. In short, what happens with a computer is kind of like filling up, think of a grid. When I create a file, the size of that file may take up the first 3 spaces in the grid, 1, 2, and 3. Then I create another file that takes up 4, 5, and 6, and a third file that takes up 7, 8, and 9. If I then go back and delete the second file, that frees up the space in the grid for 4, 5, and 6. Now if I create another file, but it's bigger, it's going to try to fill up the first spaces first. So it may take 4, 5, and 6, but then because 7, 8, and 9 are taken, it may fill up 11, 12, and 13. Now I have a fragmented file. The fourth file that I created actually is split in 2 different spaces of my hard drive. Now imagine that that's happening with hundreds or even thousands of files. Ultimately, instead of all of a file being stored in one consecutive part of your hard drive, it gets fragmented apart. And that means that it takes more time for the computer to find the file. It starts reading part and it says, oh, wait a second, now I got to go find the other part. Well, that happens to be over here. Now I have to go find the next part and the next part, and you can see how that becomes problematic. Disk defragmentation simply takes all of those pieces and rearranges them so that entire files can be located together. It optimizes the way your computer runs. You can schedule a defragmentation by saying configure schedule. For example, you could say, like this one says, run at 1 a.m. every Wednesday. You do not need to do it that often. Probably for most users, even doing it once a month is going to be enough. But you also can look at individual disks that you have. For example, I can take a look at my hard drive. If I click on it, just so you can see it a little bit better, it says that as of 11/11 at 2009, it was 0% fragmented. Perfect. That means I don't have to do anything with it. Once it gets to be above maybe 10%, then you should run a defragmentation on it. If you click on the drive, you can analyze the disk, and that will actually have it go out, show you a little picture of how fragmented it is, and then you can choose to defragment that particular disk. I will tell you that to defragment a hard drive, especially a large hard drive, can take quite a while. Not only a matter of minutes, but sometimes, even close to an hour. It depends on how large your drive is. Defrag is going to go out, and it's just going to start moving, and you'll be able to see the little blocks of color being moved around, kind of like those games when you had to move the squares to ultimately make a picture. It's the same type of concept. Defrag is important to do, and I think the best thing that you can do is come up and say, I want to configure the schedule. Configure that, as I said, maybe to run monthly in the middle of the night. That way it's not going to interfere with your work, but you'll always have an optimized hard drive. I'm not going to run through that process right now because my drives aren't fragmented, and it would actually come up and tell me it's not necessary because they're not fragmented enough to do it. So we'll just close the window down. Now we've been working within the control panel, within the system and security settings. And within system and security, we do have some other entries. We can look at network and internet, hardware and sound, which is where we can see things like our network card. We can also go to programs that I want to show you real quick. Under programs, we can uninstall a program. When you install software, it usually installs to the program files folder. And you can probably go in there and find a folder. For example, for Office 2010, I can find a folder that has that name, and I could just delete it. That is not the way to uninstall software. The reason is when you install a software program, the program associates itself with the computer. That's why when I open a document that ends in .doc, my computer knows that it belongs to Microsoft Word. If you simply remove the folder and its files, that registration is still there in something called the registry, and then your system gets really gucked up. The proper way to uninstall a program is to click on this particular feature, wait for the window to populate. It will show you all of the software you have, and then if you want to uninstall something, you simply click on it. Now, I am obviously not going to uninstall Microsoft Office, but all I would have to do is click on it, and it would come up and it would walk me through the process using a wizard. Do you want to uninstall? Yes, and it would go through the process and then tell me it's finished. It actually is very simple, but this is the correct way to do it. If, on the other hand, I simply want to change how a program is installed, I can either select it and click the Change button, or I can right-click and choose Change. This is going to bring up, again, an application window. Now, using Microsoft Office as an example, changing it would allow me, for example, to uninstall Microsoft Word, but to leave Excel and PowerPoint. Or, if I didn't install Excel to begin with, it would allow me to add that in. This is different than completely removing the software and then reinstalling it with those particular applications included. So, in short, remember that if you have software that you want to work with, you should not simply work with the folder that you're going to find in program files. You should always come in to Programs and Features and either choose to uninstall it or to modify it from here. That way you'll keep your system clean and everything will continue to work and be associated correctly. I'm going to go ahead and press my back button and just tell you that we do have all of these different categories on the left-hand side. We've talked a little bit about user accounts. We've talked a little bit about changing things like screensavers and wallpaper. So some of these you've seen, and as I said, you can get to them in different ways. Each version of Windows is going to have these options in a slightly different place, maybe with a slightly different name. But I guarantee that if you go to the control panel, or if Windows Vista and Windows 7 you use the search feature from the Start button, you'll be able to find them and work with them. Probably the one most important maintenance task you can do, especially on a home computer, is backing up your data. Now, in a business environment, usually that's handled by IT on the servers, but they also don't usually back up your own personal local hard drives because they're simply not going to go around to each computer every night and do so. But in a business environment, usually you're also not keeping information on your local hard drive, so it's not so much of an issue. On a personal computer, it's definitely something you need to take a look at. Now, I certainly hope that you aren't familiar with or you don't know anybody who has been affected by having a house fire. I learned a long time ago from some firefighters that one of the things that they do, after of course saving people and pets, is they look for things like photo albums and family pictures. Now you may say, well, why do they do that? Why aren't they getting my big screen TV or my clothes or those types of things? The reason is very simply this. People can replace beds and clothes and big screen TVs. Also, pictures are portable. So, if in the course of fighting a fire, and I do know they have other priorities to think about, but if the opportunity presents itself, most firefighters will grab a photo album because they know that photo albums are memories. Now, why do I talk about that in a computer class? Because your computer is exactly the same way. There are lots of things on a home computer that we don't want to lose. Maybe a spreadsheet where we're keeping our budget or where we have tax receipts. But I guarantee you, especially in this digital age, that if you have a lot of digital pictures of your kids growing up, their first baseball game, their first Halloween, last Christmas, those are the things that you're really going to miss because they can't be reproduced. That's why backup is so important. Even though I love computers, they sometimes fail. As a matter of fact, sometimes the hard drives fail. And if all of your digital pictures are on your hard drive, guess what? You're going to be out of luck. So, we certainly hope it doesn't come to that. We certainly don't want to lose some irrecoverable things like pictures, but really we don't want to lose anything. And it's really easy to avoid that from ever happening. And the answer is to back up. So let's see how we perform a backup using Windows. I'm going to go back to just the plain old default control panel. And remember that you can always find these options in Control Panel. And then under my System and Security, I actually have a link that says Backup Your Computer. I'm going to go ahead and give that a click. This nicely tells me that Windows Backup has not been set up. So on the right side, I'm going to click Set Up Backup. It may take a few seconds because what Windows is doing is it's going out and looking at the types of drives that you have attached to your computer. Some are not appropriate. For example, backing up to your own hard drive is really kind of silly because if your hard drive fails, having the backup there is going to be really not useful. I think you get that idea. Other types of media are also not appropriate, like a floppy disk or even a USB drive. What it's looking for are things like network drives, external hard drives, or second hard drives. On my system, I have temporarily plugged in a USB hard drive called MyBook. This is just a simple little box. I think it costs $60 or $70 from Costco. It has a lot of space on it. You can see that it actually has a total of 465, almost 500 gigabytes of space. So this is where I do my backups. Not only do I copy important files over on a regular basis, but this is where I have my Windows backup stored as well. Once it finds a drive, I simply select the drive, and then I can click on Next. You have some options for what you want to back up. You can let Windows choose, or you can choose yourself. Now, Windows is going to back up data files in libraries if you're on Windows 7. It's also going to do the desktop. If you don't have Windows 7, it will do Windows folders like My Documents and My Pictures. If you have saved everything to those files and folders, then that's really the best place and it's easy. If, on the other hand, you've created your own folders, then you might want to choose. For example, all of my business stuff is actually in a folder called PC Keys, and Windows may or may not find that that's an important folder. So I usually say, let me choose. Either one will work, but if you choose, make sure that you are consistently saving files to the locations that are going to be backed up. The only thing worse than not having a backup is having a backup but realizing you didn't back up one of your important folders. I'm going to let Windows choose, and I'll click Next. That's all there is to it. It says, what do you want to review? It says that we're going to back up items for all users, not just for one profile. It's going to be backed up to what is currently the E drive, to the drive called My Book. It's also going to use default Windows folders and locations. We also can see that it's currently scheduled to occur every Sunday at 7 p.m. Well, if you don't like that, you can go ahead and change the schedule. The schedule doesn't matter. It depends on how you work. For many people, it's overnight, after business hours. But if you tend to only use your computer late at night, then you might want to change it to maybe the middle of the day when you're normally at another job. After you set the device, the folders, and the schedule, then you would simply come to the bottom and say Save Settings and run the backup. Naturally, if you're setting up a backup, you want to start with a starting point, and that's what this will do. Now, I'm not going to do that because we don't want to take the time to watch it backing up everything, so I'm going to click Cancel at this point. Normally, it would have come back, and instead of saying it hasn't been set up, it would reiterate what we had done, the drive, the folders, as well as the schedule. That's really all there is to it, and it's kind of a set it and forget about it. As long as that particular drive that you chose is connected to the computer and the computer is on, it will run the backup however often you designated it to do so. Now, if something bad happens and you need to restore information from that drive, that likewise is simple. It's from the same window. You simply would say, I need to recover system settings on my computer. It will actually go through kind of a reverse process. It will look for your recent backup. If it finds the drive, great. If not, it will ask you what drive or what media you need to use. Then it will simply go through the process of restoring the files. This is the great peace of mind that you need, because computers are great, having information on them is wonderful, but I really have to tell you that even though I lecture over and over and over again to people that they need to back up, and everybody says they know it, usually it's not until the first catastrophe happens when people say, you know what, I knew I was supposed to do that, I just never got around to it. Or, I haven't done it in a year. There used to be a saying, "Thee who laughs last, laughs best." I've kind of modified that. And I used to say, "Thee who laughs last has a backup." And I've even modified that one. Now my saying is, I want you to remember this, "Thee who laughs last has a recent backup." And the easiest way to do that is to let Windows do the work for you. With that, all I have to do is simply come up, close this window down, and I now have my system ready to really do a lot of maintenance on its own. Let Windows Defender look for dangerous software. Hopefully I have an antivirus program as well. Let the backups happen, and I know how to go in and modify things like user settings, user accounts, passwords, even adding, removing, and changing programs and hardware using the Windows System Settings.